Okay, so the objective transformation of reality transforms the oppressive reality through reflection and action, right? This reality, right, this dichotomous relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed is transformed through this, right? And it's the same for each, right? The struggle, right? Through the struggle. And what were we struggling for? Right? The oppressor and the oppressed group are both struggling for freedom. We recognize that it is the oppressed group that is going to initiate the struggle for freedom. It is the obligation, it is the responsibility of those oppressed to struggle for their own freedom. And insofar as they struggle for their own freedom and they find liberation, not only do they emancipate themselves as oppressed, they also emancipate their oppressors, right? Because then there is no definition of I am oppressor, because there is no oppressed population anymore. They've liberated themselves. And insofar as they've liberated themselves, I cannot classify myself then as an oppressor, right? Because there's no one to oppress. Okay. Oppressive reality is compounded if, right? So this sense of oppressive reality becomes worse, right? Becomes worse if, one, there is an existence of an oppressive reality, and there is, right? I am mandated to oppress you. You are, your existence is dependent on my provisions, right? So that state of affairs exists, and there's an awareness among the oppressed of this oppressive reality, right? The oppressed group recognizes that there is this dependency, right? Insofar as they recognize their own dependency, insofar as they recognize that the way in which they provide for themselves is only through the provisions allocated to them, well, they're inherently subordinated. And insofar as they recognize that subordination, the point becomes, why can't I do it for myself? Why can't I do it for myself? If someone else can do it for me, then I must have the same abilities to provide for myself. Once I recognize that I can provide for myself, I subordinate myself, I free myself of the subordination of the other's provision, right? So what we have to recognize then is that it's very, very dangerous to talk about providing for those who need, because the question is their need a consequence of our provision, right? That's a very complicated thing to understand, but is the need that exists, and it is a need that exists within oppressed populations, a consequence of the very act of me giving? And the answer, according to Freire, is yes, right? This is what he classifies as false charity, right? Or false generosity. Okay. So then we have a syllogism that we can create. The oppressive reality, since we've recognized that oppressive reality, and I'll wait till the phone stops ringing. But since we recognize that oppressive reality compounds this problem, we can create a syllogism, right? And the syllogism is as follows. If the objective transformation of reality, right? If this transformation of reality is only possible through confronting oppressive reality, right? So if the objective transformation of reality is only possible through confronting this oppressive reality, right? And if it's the case that confrontation requires perception, in order for me to change this, I have to recognize oppression. Then we have two forms of perception that result. And he talks about this oppression, right? So we have two forms of perception, right? The first form of perception that we have is what's known as false perception. The first form is known as false perception. And false perception is the interpretation of perception as a purely subjective phenomenon, right? It is the belief that false perception is the idea that experience is nothing more than this, right? It's completely subjective, right? It's about me, it's about I, it's about what I have, what I want. Obviously, this is an idea, this false perception is an idea of either the oppressed or the oppressor. Which one would it be, right? This idea of reality is contingent on my perception would obviously be a consequence of the oppressor, right? Because the oppressor has power, right? That's false perception. True perception is the interpretation of perception as a dialectical relationship between subjective and objective realities, right? True perception is the recognition, right? So we'll put true perception. True perception is this. It's the recognition that reality is objective reality. This stuff here, objective reality, is inherently a consequence of human ingenuity, my imagination, right? So that there isn't this clear demarcation between subject and object. The things in the world become the way that they are because of the ideas that I have in my head. Similarly, oppressed populations become oppressed because I have an idea, the oppressor has an idea of their oppression in their mind. All we have to do is recognize that I am not one who should be oppressed. Once there is a transformation of the idea of oppression among the oppressed population, we can have this objective transformation of reality. And what is that objective transformation? How is it quantifiably, verifiably assessed? Is that we will not have a class of oppressed people. So just as we're talking about this relationship, if we have the idea that there is an oppressor and oppressed group, if I say you need to be oppressed because I have this idea in my mind of your oppression, then what I need to do is I need to transform the way that you see me, right? I need to transform how I am categorized and thus eliminate the idea that you had and also who you are, right? So that we are now just people. Now this is the process of humanization, right? This is the active process of humanizing a group. And this is where Freire is taking this. So to recap, in Freire, what we're attempting to do is we're attempting to recognize through the objective transformation of reality that objective experience, things in the world, are a consequence of human ingenuity. Since it's the case that human oppression is an objective experience in the world, it must be the case that there's a corresponding idea of oppression in the mind. If I am an oppressed person, I need to remove, as Bob Marley says, emancipate yourselves from slavery. I need to remove the mental idea of me being enslaved, of being dependent, of being taken care of being for another. And I need to recognize that I can be for oneself, right? This transformation from being for another to being for oneself simultaneously liberates the oppressed group, but also the oppressor group. And thus we have liberation. So I think Freire gives a great account of this process. I hope that my explanation of the objective transformation of reality and oppressive reality contributed to a better understanding of Freire's account of the pedagogy of the oppressed. With that being said, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell. Goodbye.